About that is Jonathan Davis, who's an economist and a podcaster, does the great podcast Booms and Busts. Jonathan, hello, sir.
Hi, Jamie.
How you doing?
I'm doing fine. I'm actually standing outside the Savoy Hotel in central London, so I might be looking at some of the customers, borrowers that you're talking about.
These aren't real people, are they? I mean, they are real people, but they're not regular folk, are they?
It's certainly the top 1%. It might even be the top 0.1%.
Yeah.
But clearly, it's a global elite. It's the banking elite. They've been doing extremely well over the last 10 years. The top 1% has done beyond extremely well over the last decade.
There's been 185 5 million plus mortgages over the past year. The average level of those mortgages was £9.7 million. How have we made it so cheap for rich people to borrow more money, and we're probably paying, twice as much interest for an average semi?
Yes, you're quite right. The average individual will probably be paying 1.5% to 2.5% mortgages for the last several years. But if you borrow materially more, a multiple more, as you say, £5 or £10 million, then you could probably borrow at much less than that, around about 1% or even less. Well, clearly, there's a volume discount, buy one, get one free, as it were. And the policymakers, as in governments and central banks, such as the Bank of England, they have kept interest rates low for the last decade. And here is a statistic which I think your listeners might be quite surprised at, but it's a simple fact. We have the lowest interest rates in 5,000 years. In effect, the lowest in recorded economic history.
Wow.
And they've done it for the reasons that most people understand. They've said that there are still economic problems. So I don't necessarily buy those reasons, but that's the reasons why they've given them. And interest rates are extremely low, which is interesting, because what we're seeing over the last couple of years in particular is inflation starting to come back into the system. And, I don't know whether or not we could expand on that, but in essence...
I'd like to, because I don't understand it.
Well, we've seen, for example, the price of oil go from $25 a barrel a couple of years ago. It's now over $60 a barrel. We hear just today that the living wage is going up by 6%. The public sector pay cap ended. So inflation is coming back into the system. Why is this relevant to the discussion? Well, if inflation sustains, and I as an economist believe that it will, for years, we should expect in the medium term, whether it's 1 or 2 or 3 years from now, interest rates to start creeping up and sustainably. And that's going to reverse a lot of the things that we've seen over the last 10 years.
So how would that, for instance, all these people that have borrowed 1.8 million quid, 1.8 billion quid rather, on these houses, these 185 people that have borrowed against their own wealth, rather than actually spending any of their money like we have to. How will that affect them? Are they? Because they're clearly piling this money in somewhere, but just not into the mortgages.
Well, they're borrowing a lot of money on very hugely expensive property assets. It's all relative, whether you're doing it for a £300,000 flat or a £30 million penthouse. It's all relative. And ultimately, if interest rates rise sustainably and for many years, and I must say, I'm not expecting this to happen tomorrow. I'm not expecting it to be sharp. I'm expecting it to be very gradual, perhaps 1/4 or 0.5% over the next year and a half, perhaps 1% over 3 years. But that will make a material difference to property prices.
Yeah.
It's simple arithmetic. If you're an average bod or an incredibly wealthy bod, and you earn so much, well, you can borrow so much against that earning. But if the cost of your borrowing doubles, I mean, if the average mortgage rate is 1.5% now, and it goes to even 3% in, say, 3 years, just off the top of my head, well, you cannot possibly borrow the same amount that you can borrow today, because you can't pay it back on a monthly basis. So inevitably, if you can't borrow the lump sum, you can't pay what is being asked by the seller. So house prices would fall in that scenario.
Jonathan,
as I say, this is all forecast. Who knows what will actually happen?
Well, a question for you though, Jonathan. We know for a fact that, people are struggling to get on the property ladder now. At the stage we're at now, you as an economist is saying that the interest rates are going to rise, and for a
they're likely to,
for a substantial period of time. The gravy train is coming to an end. If people can't get on the gravy train now, they're not going to be able to in 5 years' time. What are we going to do in 15 years' time when we've got hundreds of thousands of people that have got used to renting?
Right. Well, you're coming at it from the angle which the media always comes at it. You're seeing it as a problem. I see it as
No, I'm not seeing it as a problem. I'm just genuinely interested as to how the landscape's going to change.
Sure. Well, first of all, I don't actually think it's problematic. I don't think it's as problematic as you're making it sound for people to get into property if they want to, because ultimately with the Help to Buy scheme, which a lot of your listeners love, I happen to detest it. The fact is, it means you only have to borrow 5% of the value of a property as a first-time buyer. Sorry, not borrow, you have to raise 5%. I don't actually believe that is massively problematic for the bulk of folk. Eventually, whether it's by gifts or by a couple of years of hard work, you should be able to raise 5% deposit. So no, it is not an issue. It's not a problem that you can buy property. The problem is that you have to take on so much debt. And the assumption that the people that is, and indeed the media and certainly the politicians make, is that interest rates will never rise again. Well, I think that's a preposterous idea. We have the lowest interest rates in 5,000 years, and they will never rise again. Well, I think they will.
No, I hear, maybe it's just wishful thinking. Listen, Jonathan, thank you so much for joining us. Much appreciated. That's Jonathan Davis, economist and podcaster. Podcast is called Booms and Busts. Give us a call. What do you think? Are you buying a £5 million house? Is it easy? Are you just chucking your £5 million into scratch